Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Down and Dirty. And today we have with us Kalpitha Jagadeesh. Kalpitha is a UX designer. She's currently studying her master's in human-centered design and engineering from the University of Washington. We're actually having this interview at 8:30, 8:45 at night because of the time difference. And I'm really excited to have Kalpitha on. Kalpitha, it's such a pleasure to have you on because as someone who is starting on her career, you already have 4 or 5 years of experience as a designer. And then I'm assuming that's when you went to get your master's to kind of get stronger, get better, and more technical at it. So excited to hear about the design tool of your choice and why that's a design tool of your choice. Also love the fact on your LinkedIn profile that you talked about systems thinking, because I think it's so important as you know, in any profession, but especially in design, to think about the relationship between development, design, and research, right? Because that whole thing has to come together. So I love the call out, and I'm hoping that we can kind of talk a little bit more about that on this podcast. So welcome, and maybe as a way to get us started, in addition to introducing yourself, could you tell us a little bit more about, you know, how the decision to do a master's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. And to give you an overview of how I came about, pursuing a master's in human-centered design. My undergraduate degree was in architecture. And I think through the course of the program, I kind of realized that I'm more drawn towards the problem-solving capabilities of design rather than limiting the artifact that it would end up in, right? So I didn't want to kind of limit it to the built environment. And I realized some of those principles could be applied across spaces like be it in educational technology or even in the health sector. It's mostly about understanding what your users need and kind of proposing solutions based on that. And just a spatial design might not be the only solution in that case. So I think that's what led me to broaden my practice beyond the built environment, like as soon as I kind of graduated, from architecture. And so ever since I've spent like the past 5 years or so working in the digital inclusion space, where I've looked into spaces such as most recently financial inclusion, before that in the educational technology space, the IoT space as well, where I mostly looked into how we could design technology for the next wave of internet users. And I think that that's a very interesting cohort, and a lot of those experiences were very eye-opening in terms of how, we take like a lot of interfaces for granted, like the supposedly tech-savvy audience, right? Where we kind of understand how certain icons operate, and we don't even realize how much thought has actually gone into it. But for a lot of them who are coming on board to like the digital devices very newly, a lot of these things don't make sense to them, like certain icons, like say, the magnifying glass for search. And I don't think that aligns with somebody who's in rural India, for example, because they don't relate searching or finding something with that magnifying glass, right? So I think all of these professional experiences definitely helped me realize how important it is to take on that human-centered approach. And I did dabble in a bit of research, design, and like development throughout my work professionally. So I decided to pursue a master's that kind of had all these three components to, kind of expand on those professional learnings that I had. So yeah, mostly that.
Got it. So, okay, and why abroad? Do you have any? Was it the lack of courses in India, or was it the lure of studying abroad? You know, and or the opportunity rather to study abroad and kind of pursue your UX design training from there. So why abroad versus India?
So the main reason was when I was going about picking courses, right? like I told you, I was somebody who dabbled in almost all stages of the design process initially, because I was lucky enough to work with organizations that were very flexible that way, and, relatively, because they were startups, I could kind of play around with all of these interests that I had. And that's why, even from a master's program that I picked, I did not want to focus specifically only on interaction design per se, or look into something that's only focused on the engineering component, which is why, based on that filter that I was looking at, some program that has like a research, design, and an engineering component, I felt I did not find any program, like at least at the time that I was looking at back in India, or a few other like countries that I was considering as well. So that's how I went about even shortlisting schools that I'd applied to. In terms of, I mostly looked at schools that had like a design component to their engineering department that they had, because I think a lot of times just understanding how things work technically kind of helps you keep your design, grounded, and think about the feasibility of it. So yeah, that was the main reason why I kind of decided to go ahead with this program.
I think it's really fascinating that you have a background in engineering and you've gone into design, because I think that's such a strong skill set for exactly the reason that you mentioned, is you're able to think from the feasibility aspect of it, and also think about the interaction and human centered, human focused, output of that feasibility study, right? So it's okay, so that's great. So today we're going to talk about, a tool that you have used, or I'm assuming continue to use, as you're doing your master's as well. But before we get into that, can you tell me right now, in your training, as in this master's program that you're doing, what are there a litany of tools? Like, is there just one tool that I'm assuming it's not just one tool, you're being exposed to a lot of different tools and platforms and solutions. What are some things that you are engaging with on a regular basis? Another way of putting this is, if I had to see Kalpitha's computer screen open, are there some apps that are constantly on? Are there some tabs that are always open? And if so, what are they?
Okay. So firstly, in terms of like at least this master's program that I'm pursuing, and I think this is kind of a common theme across most academic programs, where they do not focus on teaching you specific tools, because tools are some things, that are ever changing, right? Like, something that's extensively used today might completely be replaced, I think, say in about 2 years or even a year later. And even new tools are constantly coming up. So a lot of these programs do not focus on any specific tools per se, but it's mostly about kind of broadening your skill sets in terms of a designer, where you learn to think like a designer, rather than being focused on, okay, this is how you use like Figma or like the Adobe set of tools and all of that. Yeah, so I think that way it's been really helpful to take a step back and think about what goes into becoming a designer, in terms of how do you get comfortable with externalizing your ideas, how do you ideate and get comfortable working with ambiguity. And I think these are some of the more important things that the program has definitely helped me develop. And I think, of course, people working in the industry as well, this is something that you automatically get exposed to, because I think the context of every project is so starkly different sometimes, that you just have to get comfortable. Like, though it is, for example, if it's an application that you're building in the fintech space, you or like already go in with like these preconceived notions of, okay, I think, this is fairly straightforward, but you realize that that doesn't work in all cases. Like you just can't white label a particular app that you've developed previously in the fintech space, because the use case is very different. The audience that you might be designing for is very different. But yeah, if I were to tell you about some tools that I use on a frequent basis and the tabs that I usually have open, it would definitely be Figma for sure, because I think, especially when you're working on digital interfaces, I think it's definitely had a very positive impact because of the web-based interface that it has. And that doesn't limit you to, whether you're working on a Windows system or whether you're working on a MacBook. There's like no platform-specific hindrances that come in. And apart from that, also, I think initially it used to be Miro, but now there is Figma has come up with FigJam, where you can also have your ideating and brainstorming sessions with like virtual sticky notes and all of that. And I think apart from that, there's also a lot of times just reading up other designers' experiences who've, worked in the space. So a lot of these blog posts, like Medium articles that you come across, and those things help summarize a lot of things for you. And I think some people put out like great summaries of this of the work that they're doing in the design space, new developments that are coming. And there are a lot of organizations that have newsletters that I've subscribed to. So these are things that kind of help me stay up to date with how the industry is changing and what's going on. So yeah.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot here, but do you remember any of these resources, the people whose newsletters you follow or company updates that you receive? Anything that you could recommend to someone if they were on Medium and were looking for inspiration?
So I think for me, initially when I was getting, into the whole process of like human-centered design and all of that, IDEO definitely had like this toolkit that they've put together. It's like a design thinking toolkit for anybody looking to get into human-centered design. And I think I remember like a few years ago going ahead and reading, the entire toolkit that they'd put across, because IDEO.org works in, so they have like multiple verticals. So IDEO.org specifically works in the digital inclusion space and across geographies. So they had spoken about how, I remember they initially had this when they were setting context and, getting readers into that mindset about how they were talking about this water supply issue that they were looking at, I think somewhere in like Andhra Pradesh back in India. And they were talking about how when they actually went on field, like the assumptions they had made about why people weren't using like a specific water pump that was installed, was a problem. And they realized their assumptions were completely off. And when they looked into that, it was just a very simple thing that didn't align with their everyday practices. So I think just going over that toolkit, because they go over each of the processes that are involved, like, the ideation phase, your actual externalizing your ideas, and then where you're going to brainstorming, how long you might have to spend, the number of people involved, stakeholder interviews that you conduct. So right from the research phase to the ideation to design, they give you like a good overview. And I think that's something that definitely helped me. From time to time, I do kind of, go over some of the work that they're doing in the space and all of that. And I remember the Mixed Methods podcast as well, which exposed me to a lot. They interview like a lot of designers who are working in the tech industry and all of that. And I think because of the broad perspective that you get from the kind of content that they put out, I think that definitely kind of helped me draw parallels between the things I was experiencing without formal training in the field versus how it works in the industry. And I think, yeah, that was really helpful.
That's fantastic. Okay, all right. So we have a few things open on your computer, and you mentioned one of them was Figma, and I know that that's something that we're gonna kind of dive into as well. So let's start with your introduction to Figma as a tool. Is this something that I mean, you were a designer for a couple of years before you actually did your master's. Is that the time you were introduced to Figma, or was it a little more recent than that?
Yeah, I think Figma I've been using since about 2018 now. So
Okay,
this was on
from the beginning
like
almost.
yeah, so
Yeah.
like the first job that I was started off on as a UX designer, I remember at the time, like my manager back then, we were looking into finding a more collaborative tool where multiple people on the team could, collaborate on certain apps and other web applications that we were working on. And so I think a lot of times, as designers, you work in terms of sketches when you're ideating, and then just get very scrappy in terms of, externalizing your ideas. And the thing with that sometimes is, when you show it to clients, I think sketching is devalued sometimes, where it's like,
Mm.
it just looks like not much thought has gone into it because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very
yeah. Yeah,
preliminary.
right.
So I think that's why a tool like Figma, where you can actually package your ideas, make it look more professional, and kind of and even without people knowing the tool, you can share like a web-based link to people. So that helped collaboration across geographies, I think. So even if somebody from the client side who was sitting in another country wanted to give you feedback on a product, or they wanted somebody else's perspective, certain mentors that they had for their organization, that became very helpful. And so we were comparing tools that allowed this kind of collaboration, and at the same time, all of us had different machines we were working on, which was like some of us were on like Windows, some people were, within the Apple ecosystem, or even
Yeah.
Linux. And I think out of all the tools that existed back then, this was the most platform agnostic tool, because apart from the app that you could download, they had like the web-based interface. And I think
Right.
as long as you have an internet connection, you could use it. And so I think that's mostly what made us go ahead with that tool. And yeah, ever since, I think I've gotten comfortable with it, and yeah, I've been using it for like
So
ideation design.
what all did you were there other contenders on the table? Like, who do you remember some of the other contenders, even whether it's with this company or over the years? What are some other competitors to Figma that you have tried and tested, if at all?
Yeah. So I remember at the same time, actually the first prototyping tool that I used was Adobe XD.
Hmm.
And it was a great tool because I think I remember initially when I started off, a lot of times, people used to use like even shapes on PowerPoint sometimes to kind of replicate designs to show developers as to, okay, this is how it's going to look, when you build it out. And but with the introduction of tools like Adobe XD and Figma, and I think even Sketch,
Hmm.
all these tools kind of help you simulate and create like a simulation of an application without having to invest time thinking about the logic in terms of, front end development and all of that. And I think out of all these tools, all of them are very powerful, but I think the whole reason why I decided to just go ahead with this specific tool is only because it had like this web-based interface back then, which all of those platforms I think have switched to that now. But at least back then, this was the only one that had a web-based interface, and I didn't have to think about like space issues on my laptop or even having things saved locally. So I think, yeah, that was mostly the reason why. But there are a lot of tools that help you prototype. There's like There's apart from the Adobe tools, you also have like InVision, and then there's there are like multiple platforms that have come about which help you do this. Miro helps you create mockups now. Initially, it used to be for like brainstorming and just having your ideation sessions with sticky notes and creating like flow diagrams and all of that. But you can create mockups there as well. So yeah, there are quite a few of them that enable you to do that.
So the trigger was you working in this company, you were trying out, the team was trying out different solutions, design platforms, and fair enough, because of, the web-based benefit, and the fact that it was platform agnostic, led to adopting Figma. So understood that. But over the years, your continued loyalty towards Figma, is that again, is it because everywhere you went, people were using Figma, or was this a personal preference that you kind of carried through the years?
So I mean, it was not a personal preference per se, because I just think a lot of the organizations I worked with were also using the tool, which is why, I continued using it. And in fact, like initially, a lot of my work was on Adobe XD. And when I have to revisit and, kind of tweak my portfolio and all of that, I still do use Adobe XD because a lot of my initial work was on that. That was the first tool where I actually dabbled in, in terms of any sort of prototyping and design and prototyping that I used in product design. So it was mostly because I think a lot of organizations that I was working with were using Figma at that time. So I just continued using it. And I think now a lot more people have got into using it extensively, which is why you just end up collaborating, and you want to use the same platform as everyone else, so that you don't face issues when you're sharing a particular file with someone and all of that. So that's mostly why. But yeah, definitely no bias towards only using it.
Got it. So okay, so you're kind of going back to Adobe XD. Would you say it's because some of your earliest designs are there, or is there some other benefit that Adobe XD gives you outside of what organizations are using?
So I think both platforms, like most platforms that work in a specific place, in a specific space, and they kind of start adding similar features. So both of them are as powerful, I'd say. And for me, I think now a lot of times you can save XD files on cloud as well now. So that's definitely not a problem anymore. And I think also the fact that Figma, like at least to share your designs and stuff, you could share multiple links without having to pay for it. I think so the fact that it was free, and in fact now because Adobe has taken over Figma as well, there might be a lot of overlap, and I kind of haven't done that comparison between the tools yet. But yeah, I think there are just a lot of these things that are very similar. And because I learned XD, a lot of the kind of options you have on, each of this, it was the same. There was the learning curve was fairly straightforward, I'd say. And I think I'm sure a lot of designers can relate as well. Once you know one tool, picking up others does not become that hard, because I think when I started off learning Photoshop, a few years ago, when I was an architecture student, I remember, because I hadn't worked with any of the Adobe tools before, it was a bit of a challenge to wrap my head around how achieving specific effects work and all of that. But because I'd spent like a fair share of time watching like tutorials and like learning that, I most other tools afterwards that were kind of built on the same premise kind of became easier to pick up. So yeah.
Okay, so right now are you still using Adobe XD to a certain extent along with Figma?
Not at the moment, because I think I just didn't want to keep doing back and forth between
makes sense.
platforms. So because most of my work just exists here, and I think
Yeah.
be it in school or any other organizations that I'm like currently involved with, most of them are on Figma. So I think by default I just end up using it. But
Okay.
yeah, for like no other specific reason.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So let's jump right into the tool. Let me give you permission to, yes, you may share your screen now. And what I would like us to do is, I would like you to take us through what you would normally use, when you log into Figma, where are you mostly spending your time on the platform?
Yeah. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is the workspace, the Figma workspace that you can see. And you mostly have like this blank canvas here. You can go ahead and name the file whatever you want. And the first step, when you're working on Figma would be to add what's called a frame. And that basically serves as your blank canvas on which, you add each of your placeholder components that you start building on. And as you can see on the left panel, the minute I click on frame, you can look into designing for phone screens, tablets, desktops, or even create presentations if you want to create like an interface for the Apple Watch, or even create flyers and posters, or create like social media posts for like Instagram banners, Twitter posts, and all of that. It enables you to, select preset dimensions so that you don't have to get into the nitty-gritties of like, okay, what is a phone screen dimension that I have to look into.
Right.
Figma also has what's called Figma community, where a lot of designers, like product developers across, can like put out certain assets that they create for people to reuse and build on, which is also very, very helpful to draw inspiration and look at how you can do things. But yeah, the first step would be like, say today I decide to create an app for the iPhone. I just select the iPhone 14 screen and it shows up here.
Is it normally how you start, Kalpitha? Like when you're starting with your design work, you start with an existing device, right? And then you start designing in that, or do you actually start with the community where you're looking for inspiration and building on something that's already happening? What's your normal process?
Yeah, so my normal process actually would be, I think, in terms of the design process that I'd follow, firstly, it would be, I mean, sometimes you do have like, the research team that would have conducted preliminary user research. You have actual insights from your users, and you kind of know what design opportunities that you're you're trying to expand on. But there are also times in the industry where you do not have time to conduct research. So you are building a preliminary product based on assumptions, and then you decide to test it out and iterate from there. In those cases, I think I'd spend time doing some sort of desk research, firstly to like just wrap my head around the space that we're looking to work in, just to understand some nuances of the domain and all of that. And then I'd go into like, usually as designers, working with mood boards is something that really helps. So you decide based on, if it is an application for, say, you're designing a mobile app for older adults, and the kind of theme, the colors that you choose would be very different compared to if you were designing for Gen Z, right? Like I think you wouldn't use something that's very jarring when you're designing something for older adults, and then they're not a tech savvy audience, so you use something that's more calming, that's more welcoming and all of that. But you'd be more ready to explore and experiment when you're designing for Gen Z, I guess, because the bandwidth that they have to kind of process things that are out of the ordinary is higher. So I think, yeah, I'd start off creating mood boards, and then we only get onto Figma like a while after all of this preliminary work is done, in terms of deciding on a direction in terms of, what's the overarching theme you want to stick to, and then move into
And where are
define.
you doing the mood boards? Where would you be
Um,
designing boards, on Miro or on FigJam?
so yeah, I have started using Figma for that, but I use platforms like Pinterest, Behance, or Design Inspiration, and a lot of these spaces to kind of, look at, decide on the images and deciding on color palettes and all of that for inspiration. There's Dribble as well, and
Yeah.
all of that. And once I look for once I'm satisfied with the direction that I've chosen, and of course that can change over time, but just as a starting point. And then after that, I think I'd sit with identifying design opportunities, and a lot of work as designers, not only individual, but there is a lot of collaborative work that happens based on the phase you are in. So I think ideation and brainstorming a lot of times is collaborative with all team members. Sometimes it can be across verticals as well, to try and understand what is it we're trying to achieve, with this product that we're trying to put out. So a lot of that happens, if it's in person, of course, you're having like, it's a workshop with like actual sticky notes and all of that. But now you can do this virtually as well with remote work through platforms such as FigJam and Miro. So yeah, that's
what is it that you use? That's what I'm more interested in.
okay.
Is what you're using.
Yeah, I mostly use FigJam for the brainstorming
And
stuff.
is that because it's integrated with Figma, or is there another reason why FigJam works better than, let's say, Miro?
No, it's mostly because it's integrated with Figma, because otherwise before that, for the longest time, I used to use Miro. So
Miro, yeah, which gets the job done. If it's
Exactly.
post-its and moving post-its around and creating, boards that you can zoom in and out of, I can see how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, so Figma got it right in terms of deciding to integrate a Miro-like experience into Figma itself. So you are putting your ideas down there in FigJam, collaborating, thinking through stuff, and then you come to Figma to actually execute on the design. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you come here, you're starting with sometimes, as you said, community, sometimes, depending on the kind of brief that you have, start with an existing template, or sometimes you're starting from scratch, but again, starting with, the kind of screen that you're designing for.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. Fine. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, continue. You were saying?
No, I was just saying that, so without taking us through the design steps, just broadly speaking, you start with the screen, and then what types of tools are you most likely to use outside of just the actual design tools? Of course, you need that, that's what you're doing. But what are some other feature sets that are useful for the kind of work you're doing?
Okay. So I think one thing that's very powerful in terms of what Figma can do is creating what's called components. So the thing is, when you think of any application, right, sometimes there can be hundreds of screens that you have based on, the number of years it's been around for and the versions that it's been through. And you have multiple buttons and like the theming that you have to stick to, consistency in terms of that throughout. So I think just having to go manually change each of, and as an organization, sometimes you might decide to go through like a complete rebranding, and you decide that, for example, say if YouTube were to decide, instead of the red, we want to have like blue as the color that we're going to go ahead for our branding and our applications and stuff. then imagine having to sit and change every button or every spot in your design that has this color. That's just a lot of manual work, which, you know, you don't really want to invest that much time in something like that. So being able to create components on Figma, I can like give you an example. So if you um, like imagine this is one of these applications where you decide you want a button that maybe you want it to be black, and then you want it to be a curved button instead of it having sharp edges. So you add in your curved edges by defining like a border radius for it, and then you decide to add text, and maybe say you were to say it's a submit button, and yeah, so you just and you have the button here. Once you've kind of created it, this is the design of most of your buttons, you know, on your screens that you have, and you can go ahead and make that what's called a component. And I decide that, okay, for today, I'm going to work on the first flow here. So I create like copies of, you know, say 3 screens, and each of them have like some call to action in the form of a button. So I will add, you know, these buttons at the end of the page. You can assume that you probably have the header here, you know, that says maybe has like home written on top, and then, you know, that's the home page. So now assuming all of this has like a lot of content, like assuming this was Spotify's app, and initially, as per your theme, you have like you know, green buttons is what you have. And suddenly, a few months later, your team decides that they want to make it blue. So if you noticed, because I used, I made this a component and I used copies of it on my screen. When I changed the button from black to green, it reflected everywhere automatically without me having to create individual buttons and change it. So you can imagine when you have hundreds of screens, this can be extremely powerful, where overnight, if you were to decide that my brand colors are moving from a green to say a blue and something else, it's just an easy change like this compared to, you know, having to go and do it everywhere else. So I think that's great. Another thing that is very helpful and powerful, I think, is in terms of the industry, there is always this rift, you know, sometimes in terms of design and development, because like implementing things, and because I worked as a front-end developer, I can relate to how hard it might be sometimes, because when you know you have all of these designs that you want to create, have all these nice gradients and have like some sort of curved forms on your screen and all of that, but when you actually have to get to executing that using CSS, that's a whole different thing sometimes, because to achieve like that design and replicate it exactly can be very frustrating sometimes, where, you know, things start breaking, the behavior is not the same, because there are a lot of other things that come into play, you know, because of the web. And due to that, sometimes, you know, there's always that rift that comes up where developers are like, I mean, as long as it works, it's fine. But, you know, designers have put in these hours of effort, but that might not even get translated to designs. But the reason why that's being done is all informed through a lot of ideation and decision making that is gone. And I think so, because Figma has what's called the dev mode as well. So for example, if I were to say, I decide on this home screen, I'll have like one big image here, and you know, I also have certain elements in the form of a list over here below it. And yeah, you can assume this is like the screen. And if I just think of this as an interface that is like YouTube's home screen or something, the YouTube Music app, and if I were to give this to a developer and they look at it like this, they're going to have to make assumptions in terms of what might the spacing be. Is it in
Right.
pixels or what unit? But using the development mode, as you can see here, so in the dev mode, once you enable that, what happens is if you share this with the development team, they can immediately click on any specific item, and you get these cues, as you can see, in terms of like
Yeah.
the 43 that you see, what's the distance between the header and the image that you have to include. And as you can see on the right hand side, it also gives you like the code for the CSS attributes that you can use. And I
Pretty neat.
think this is very, very powerful because this avoids a lot of assumptions, and so a designer's work and effort that's gone in can automatically be translated. So both the designers and the developers are happy because you can just copy paste this these attributes into your CSS file, and you're automatically able to achieve those styles. And you even get like the what's called the hex code for the colors. And so even the colors that you want people to replicate for gradients or anything else automatically reflects. And that's something that's very, very powerful.
Makes sense. So okay, so I can see the value for you in what you're doing, and I'm imagining that even as a student, when you are delivering on your design projects, right, the ease with which you can do things, for example, the component library or the collaboration that you have to do, possibly, in teamwork when you're working with more than one person. The fact that you can share links, web links. Again, I know competitors have, are offering a lot of these things so far, but it seems like this is the market leader advantage at this point is, people are already familiar with it. So you kind of use the tool that's the dominant tool in the marketplace. Where does Figma, or does Figma fail to deliver in certain aspects? And does another tool kind of do the job better?
I mean, I don't know about a tool that might be doing something better, but a few things, like I think, of course, in terms of all platforms, it's usually the whole thing about, when you create a feature, sometimes there are always unintended consequences that you might not have accounted for, right? And that's why you probably are doing things a specific way. So a few things that I probably, when I'm working and, wished I had an option to do something differently, could probably be, so for example, when I'm working on Figma, sometimes, say I have this file has like 50 screens, and one thing that you can do is, like I said, it's a simulate. You can create a simulation of your application without, any development. So it has what's called, this is the mode in which you design. This is the mode in which you can create a prototype, which is the replica of your app. So when you're in prototype mode, you can basically link things. So when I click submit button, I'd say it, leads me to this page and I can link it. So when I have 50 screens, I think you can see this light blue arrow and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So there are multiple elements on a screen and they're linked everywhere. And I remember once I wanted to create a separate version of a particular app that I had designed, but I wanted to change the way, certain pages are linked. And when I create a copy of it in the same file, of course, it retained all of the links, but I realized even when I copy, like even when I create a new file and copy my screens, I did not have an option to choose not to kind of import all of the linkages I'd created. And I think that's when I was like, oh my God, do I have to manually go and unlink all of this, And
Right.
so I think, yeah, that was one case. I'm not sure if that feature has been implemented now, but I think back then I remember extensively looking for this because I was like, I want the design to remain, but the way I link it is something that I want to be, different. And I think, yeah, that's one thing that I definitely wish. And I think also in terms of reordering screens, sometimes I think when you have multiple screens, I'd want to say I have like 30 screens in a row, and I decide I create like a new design here and I want this screen to appear somewhere in between. Then that's when sometimes the whole reordering thing might have to be done manually, which is why just moving around it, I think can be time consuming sometimes. So I think, and there are definitely plugins and stuff that you can use. But I think just something that comes inbuilt within the platform is something that you end up trusting more. So I think, yeah, these are a few things where I was like, okay, I think I would have liked to have this. But yeah, apart from that, no complaints as such, because like I mentioned,
Yeah,
as you click on this and go to share
yeah,
the link,
yeah.
yeah, it looks, you get like a phone screen, and people
That's
automatically take
amazing.
you more seriously the minute your designs are packaged like this. So yeah.
No, I think it's fascinating. Let's stop the share screen for now.
Okay.
And thank you for taking us through that. I think it's so important, especially when you are making a name for yourself, right? And you're starting to build your reputation as a professional designer, right? And someone who should be taken seriously for the work that you're creating. Having the tools that can give you the sheen of professionalism is uh, is to be taken seriously, right? I mean, this is serious stuff. I mean, this is how we put ourselves out there in the world, right? This is the image we want to portray, and it seems like here's a tool that's allowing you to do that. It has all of these other bells and whistles, that help you design better. but you mentioned this a few times, and I seen the importance of that is when you're putting something out there, it looks polished, and it looks polished just because of the platform you're using, right? I mean, you could have done the same design somewhere else, but it seems like right now this is the leader in giving your designs a more polished look. And it's no wonder then that it'll be something, as long as it doesn't break and continues to do what it's
Yeah.
already doing for you, that it's something you will keep relying on. So yeah, and for the challenges that there are, I'm hoping that eventually Figma is going to see this, or we'll compile a list of challenges and desired gains that designers wish Figma offered, and that eventually would happen. Any last comments, Kalpitha? I mean, we've talked whatever we could. My gosh, it's almost 9:30, but we've talked a good amount about your experience using Figma. Is there anything else that you want to add about what the tool does for you as a designer, and any thoughts on what a designer who's watching this might want to keep in mind when they're considering a tool like this?
So firstly, I think like I mentioned before, more than anything, knowing Figma or any other specific tool, doesn't automatically make anybody a good designer, because I think just knowing any of these tools and then, when it's replaced by another tool, it shouldn't be like, okay, I automatically don't know what else to do. So I think more than, because tools are just a means to an end in terms of executing your ideas and all of that, but I think, and I'm speaking about designer as a broad encompassing term now, where a lot of other things that can help somebody who's trying to break into design, I think, would be, because it is definitely very intimidating, in terms of like, oh my God, I don't have visual design skills or like anything like, a lot of these aspects that come about, because I think design in itself has so many niches that exist. Like there's graphic design, UI
Yeah.
design, user experience design, and all of that. So I think what helps is getting comfortable externalizing your ideas, because I think for the longest time that's something even I hesitated with, where I'd have all of these ideas in my head, but sometimes when it's just left floating around in your head, you
Yeah.
sometimes don't make anything tangible until you think you've thought through it fully. But I think actually externalizing it, though it's not a fully developed idea in your head, can help, because getting feedback early on, even if it's a simple sketch and you're telling somebody on your
Yeah.
team that this is what I'm thinking, we probably have, this is how we want to lay things out on the
Yeah.
screen. Getting feedback is really helpful. So I think firstly, getting comfortable externalizing ideas. Then another important aspect that can help is like storytelling, I think, in terms of how sometimes you put in so much effort into your designs, but if you cannot build a narrative around it and convey your ideas, like having that power to, put across your designs in a more engaging manner is something that can be super helpful. I think apart from that, I mean, this is not a compulsion, but if you're interested in dabbling in some extent of how the web works and looking into some bits of like HTML or CSS, I think that can just help you. Of blue sky thinking is great in the initial phases of
Yeah.
design, but when it actually comes to execution, it can kind of help you think about how to keep your designs more grounded. I think, yeah, these are some things, and like just learning how to embrace ambiguity and being okay with, working with the unknowns in the beginning. These are some things that can definitely help, like break into design.
That's pretty cool. So even before you get into Figma, there may be other avenues, other ways in which you can, warm yourself up and then, lead up to Figma is what you're saying. So that's sound advice, and thanks for that. And thank you for your time. I mean, I know it's probably morning, afternoon, early afternoon for you, I'm assuming, end of the day for me. And I just want to, thank you again for sharing your insights. And I wish you luck as you complete your master's degree. And maybe we will see you on this side of the planet again. Like who knows what happens after your master's. But yeah, appreciate the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it was lovely speaking to you. So, yeah.
Fantastic. All right, Kalpitha. Bye. Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.